All right, well, welcome everybody. I'm going to be monitoring the chat box, I hope. And basically, this is our second session. And last Monday, it was actually fairly easy to ask questions and such. Plus, we also brought in a few of the chat questions. So don't hesitate that if you've got a question or want to further comment, just go ahead and unmute and speak up. The first session is posted on YouTube if you missed it or want to review what was discussed last Monday. So at this point, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Eric.
Okay, well, the last session we did turned out to be a lot of discussion about the rules. People had a question, you know, who has the right of way in this situation? Who's obligated to do this? Can I do that? Is this one incident or two? And it got pretty dry. This session, I want to be not just talking about what do the rules mean, but really focus on how to apply them, specifically at a Leeward Mark Rounding. When I set out to learn the rules, I didn't really want to know the rules. I wanted to know how to use the rules to my advantage. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. And I sent out this picture ahead of time, kind of with the question of what's the best way to round a Leeward Mark? Let's just say it's a single Leeward Mark, not a gate, regular mark to be rounded to port, and you're coming downwind. You know, do you round it like this boat is rounding Mark A? That is coming right next to it and then turning after you get past it. Or like B, where you start the turn a little early and swing by perpendicular to the wind and beam to the mark? Or do you do it like the boat is passing Mark C, where you dip down wide and turn and exit so that you're already on a close held course when you pass it? Does anybody have an answer they think is correct?
I vote for C.
Any other votes?
My guess is that it's going to be situation driven.
So Don, you want to say why you like C?
It gives you speed up the next line is mostly what I'd be looking for, and an inside track on other boats.
Well, the first few times that I went to decent-sized away regattas, and they had a Go Fast seminar before the regatta, invariably they would have somebody there who would say, look, when you come to a Leeward Mark, you have to enter wide and exit close. And he would set a mark out on the grass and walk around showing how he's entering wide and exiting close. So that's the answer that we've all been trained to accept.
And that's answer C, correct?
And that's as this exhibit is rounding Mark C. And that's what's known commonly as a tactical rounding. But what if there are no other boats around? Would you still do a tactical rounding? If you look closely at this diagram, can you see my mouse here? My mouse pointer? Or is it not showing that?
Yes, we can see.
You'll notice that as the boat is rounding Mark B, he's just sailing down to the mark and around and back up. But in the cases of A and C, the boat is actually sailing farther beyond the mark and back up.
We're frozen or something?
Eric, we lost your audio.
You lost my audio. Still?
Just for a moment.
Is it back?
Yes.
Okay.
So when you were saying if there's nobody else around.
If there's nobody else around, rounding it like the boat is rounding Mark B is shorter by almost 2 boat lengths. So in order to round like you're rounding Mark A or to do a tactical rounding, you actually have to sail a farther distance.
If you look at the diagram, then number 5, they would all come out at the same speed. It's just the distance they go, right?
Right. It was easier for me to draw the boats once and put in 3 marks than it was to draw 3 pictures of boats rounding the mark in the same position. I kind of apologize for that.
No, it's-
But if this is coming in, making a at-speed turn and coming out. So if you are doing B, which is what's known as a seaman-like rounding, it's actually shorter and faster.
Yeah.
And I think I have a little picture of, hey, here's my answer. Coming in, doing a seaman-like rounding, and out. That's the fastest way around the mark. That makes sense to everybody?
Sure.
So my answer is if you're all alone, and especially if you're sailing on handicap, then the fastest way around the mark, the best way around the mark is the seaman-like rounding.
And why does sailing on handicap versus one design make a difference? Anybody want to offer an idea? So my thought when Eric said that, one design, you know where the other boats are and you're doing your tactics and strategy to stay ahead of the other boats. Handicap, every second, every 2 seconds counts. Eric,
If you're sailing one design and you're all alone at the mark, then either you're pretty far ahead or you're pretty far behind. So, I mean, 2 boat lengths difference probably isn't going to make a huge, isn't going to matter in the grand scheme of the race. But if you're sailing handicap, then you very well may be alone at the mark, but seconds still count. And why sail 2 extra boat lengths when you don't have to? Okay, so let's say there is another boat nearby and you enter the zone. Well, before we talk about rules boat on boat, let's take a look at the actual rule.
Oh, joy.
What is mark room and when do you have to give it? And here's the definition of mark room. Mark room is room for a boat to leave a mark on the required side. Also, room to sail to the mark when her proper course is to sail close to it. And room to round the mark as necessary to sail the course. There's additional text here for room to tack, but that doesn't apply at a leeward mark. I doubt people want to tack at a leeward mark.
Unless they have to do a penalty turn for some reason.
I hope you're not doing a penalty turn in the zone while other boats are coming. That would be bad news.
Not that it doesn't happen.
And let's just also look at, if I can find it. What exactly does it mean for room to sail to the mark? And there actually is a world sailing case on this issue to help us interpret it. And it says, in the definition of mark room, the phrase room to sail to the mark means space to sail promptly in a seaman-like way to a position close to and on the required side of the mark. So that means room to sail to the mark is not bow to it, but side to the mark. So when you have to give somebody room to the mark, you have to give them room to sail up next to the mark, and then as much room as they need to sail around the mark in order to sail the course.
Does that mean they can't do a tactical rounding in that case?
Mark room does not include room to do a tactical rounding.
Okay.
That's a very important distinction. Thank you, Peter. And there are also rules about when you're protected sailing within your mark room, and it's important to note that that does not include room to do a tactical rounding. And there are also cases and appeals on that.
But Eric, are there rules that give you the right so that you can do a tactical rounding?
We'll talk about that in one of the other examples, okay? I didn't mean to stop the share. So let's go back to this diagram. So what do you think is the right thing for blue to do? Which way should blue attempt to round this mark?
I would say a seaman like. He's ahead.
I like option number C, Don's option.
Okay, well, let me play this scenario out and we can watch how it goes. Okay, you see right now, actually the blue boat, who was ahead at the zone, I'll go back, look at position 1. Blue is clear ahead at the zone. So yellow has to give blue mark rounding for the remainder of the mark rounding. Should we go back and read the rule on that before we start this? Let's go back and look at the rule.
I think Eric was not going to allow to go back to the rule.
Well, I don't want this to be a rule session, but Rule 18 governs this whole thing, this whole discussion. We're going to be talking about how Rule 18 affects your tactical choices, so it's vitally important to cover it. So here, Rule 18.2 is the governing rule, specifically 18.2b, which says, if boats are overlapped when the first of them reaches the zone, the outside boat at that moment shall thereafter give the inside boat mark room. If a boat is clear ahead when she reaches the zone, the boat clear astern at that moment shall thereafter give her mark room. So what you have to do is look at the position of the boats at that moment, the moment the first one reaches the zone, and then the obligation to give mark room is set there and lasts throughout the mark rounding. And when a boat is required to give mark room by Rule 18.2b, she shall continue to do so even if later an overlap is broken or a new overlap begins. So whether or not you break or establish overlap inside the zone doesn't matter. And part 2, if she becomes overlapped inside the boat entitled to mark room, she shall also give that boat room to sail her proper course while they remain overlapped. And this part is very important. If you stick your nose, if you have to give another boat mark room at the leeward mark, and you stick your nose inside, you are asking for trouble. The other boat, you have to give the other boat room to them. You still have to give them mark room, and you also have to give them room to sail their proper course, which in this case could be a tactical rounding. So my answer to you, Peter, should have been, it depends. This is one instance in which, in addition to giving the mark room, they also have to give room to sail the proper course.
Eric, you want to go back to the drawing?
Okay. Let's go back to the drawing. So at position 1, blue has reached the zone and yellow is clear astern. Therefore, for the duration of the mark rounding, yellow owes blue mark room. And as you can see, as soon as blue starts turning towards the mark here, yellow has established an inside overlap. So not only does yellow have to give blue mark room, she also has to give blue room to sail her proper course, which in this case would be a tactical rounding. So let's play a little more. One of two things is yellow has two choices. She can either bear away and pass behind blue and go outside of her, or she can try to turn and stay inside. And here's what happens either way. You see, if yellow goes inside, not only does she have to give blue mark room, she also, as windward boat, has to keep clear. So if she tries to go inside, blue can shut the door on her and cut her off at the mark and make her spin around. So that's my first tactical advice here is don't try to get inside of a boat that you will mark room to.
Now, yellow could have also slowed down, but then wouldn't have been in too much of a different position than bearing off and going below.
Now, you can see here the advantage to blue for doing what's called a tactical rounding. By staying close to the mark, she's forced yellow to go outside of her. And she's wound up in a position where not only is she over a boat length ahead still, she's also to windward of yellow, casting dirty air on her. And by being in this position, she's preserved her ability to tack if she wants to. If for some reason she thought, for example, the left side of the course was favored upwind, she would be free to tack. So the advantages of doing a tactical rounding are they don't let anybody get to windward of you. They don't let anybody get in a controlling position on you, and then leaves you free to tack if you want. That makes sense?
Yep.
Any questions from anyone on this scenario?
I kind of alluded to it before, but let me say specifically again that mark room does not turn off the other right-of-way rules. Several quads ago it did, but that confused a lot of people. So they changed the rules so that mark room is simply a requirement, but the other right-of-way rules still apply. Remember I said that in this situation, if yellow tried to go inside, she was windward boat and had to keep clear. So rule 11 still applies, windward leeward. If boats come in on opposite tacks, rule 10 still applies. Did you get him, Peter?
Oh, a fly. Got the window open.
Okay, so what if you approach the mark and you're overlapped? And as the inside boat, you're a little ahead. What do you think the answer is? Do you want to do a tactical rounding, a seaman-like rounding, or just whatever mark room you can get away with rounding? No takers?
Well, yellow would be the inside boat, right? So,
Right. Okay, so let me back up and ask the other question. Which boat has to give the other boat mark room?
blue.
In this case, they are overlapped when they reach the zone, and the outside boat, blue, has to give the inside boat mark room. So we'll play this out. Now you see I've drawn it so that blue actually changes course here. And as leeward boat, she can, as long as she gives yellow room to keep clear of her. But she can turn yellow and force yellow to sail directly to the mark. As Peter pointed out earlier, yellow is entitled to mark room, but that doesn't mean she gets to round the mark any way she likes. So blue can head yellow up and force her to sail to a position directly adjacent to the mark.
And my thought is that blue should do so. There's no reason for blue to be nice and stay far away. There's no tactical reason not to do so. If
blue doesn't turn and force yellow to the mark, if blue gives yellow more room, then yellow can use that room. I could give you the technical terminology of the rule, but the shorthand way of remembering that is room freely given may be freely taken. If blue doesn't turn up and force yellow to turn up, then yellow doesn't have to. In fact, yellow would probably prefer that blue didn't, because if blue gave yellow room enough to do a seaman-like rounding, she'd sail faster. And if blue gave yellow room to do a tactical rounding, then yellow would come out definitely ahead of blue. But as I've drawn it in this situation, both boats sail as fast as they can around the mark. And because blue can never turn up inside of yellow, she has to sail around her and winds up outside and behind at the end. Okay, has anybody seen that happen on the race course? Makes sense?
Yeah.
Does yellow or blue have any better options here? Is there anything either boat should have done differently?
So blue would have slowed down and then come in behind and try to point higher.
Well, if blue slowed down, let me go back. If blue had slowed down, then maybe yellow could have gotten ahead and then swung wide, being ahead. When it's just two boats, you know, blue can try to slow down and dip behind in order to try to come up behind yellow. But what can yellow do to defend in that case? Well, yellow can also slow down.
Yeah.
So this turns into a case of slow down to go fast. You may have heard that phrase before too. If you are the inside boat coming into a mark rounding and you are even or a little bit ahead, chances are you're going to be able to force the other boat to stay outside and you're going to come out ahead. So let's look at a case where yellow and blue have a similar relationship, except that blue is just a little bit farther back and there's another boat farther outside. What do you expect is going to happen in this situation?
Well, yellow would still be the inside boat.
Right, yellow is still the inside boat.
It still has mark room rights.
And blue owes yellow mark room because yellow they're overlapped and yellow is inside when yellow reaches the zone.
And green would owe blue mark room. Actually, both of them mark room.
Well, at this point, does green owe yellow mark room?
Yes, because they are overlapped.
Correct, because even if they are not overlapped with each other, an intervening boat overlaps both. So by definition, yellow and green are overlapped. So both blue and green owe yellow mark room at this point on.
An intervening boat on the same tack.
I beg your pardon?
The middle boat has to be on the same tack as the two outside boats.
No, she doesn't.
Oh, never mind. Another meeting, keep going.
We can talk about the definition of overlap at another meeting. That's not what we're talking about here. Okay, now blue has reached the zone and is overlapped with green. So now also green has to give blue mark room. So I'm going to play this out a little bit further of what I think the boats would most likely try to do. Well, not in this one. I'm going to do that in the next one. So you see, at this point, blue is no longer outside of yellow. So yellow is no longer keeping blue from rounding up. So what's happening here actually is that yellow is doing a rounding, what I would call a mark room rounding. That is, she's being forced to sail in close and will exit wide. Blue is doing more of a seaman-like rounding, and green has swung a little bit wide and can actually perform a tactical rounding. So you see each boat is doing a different kind of rounding.
Oh, to be green.
I beg your pardon?
It's good to be green.
This is a case where being behind can actually wind up being to your advantage. If you look at this closely, blue, who was in the middle coming to the mark, a half a boat length behind yellow and a half a boat length ahead of green, has actually come out about a half a boat length ahead after coming out of the mark rounding, because she sailed the seaman lag rounding. She sailed a shorter distance. Yellow, who was forced to come in close and exit wide, has wound up not very far behind. She started out ahead. She's now a little bit behind, but she's in a position where she's totally controlled by blue. The way I've drawn it here, she's probably still getting okay wind, but she has no choice on where to go. Blue is controlling her absolutely. And green, who was actually the farthest behind, has snuck in the inside and come out a little bit behind blue, pretty much even with yellow. So in this rounding, she's gained almost a full boat length on yellow. But she's in a position where she is totally controlling whatever blue and yellow can do. And I would say a lot of what I consider to be tactics is not only just passing boats, but getting in a position where you are controlling the options of the other boats, where what they do is up to you. And you can use that later to generate passing opportunities. For example, if the wind was better on the left side, green is free to tack away whenever she wants and go for that better wind. Blue and yellow can't as long as green is there. And yellow can't as long as blue is there. Another possibility, and one of my favorite tactical moves for a long time, once I discovered it, was rounding inside of another boat on the last upwind leg, especially if there was a midline start-finish. And if I was in green's position here, then I would be free to drive blue and yellow all the way off to the right side of the course, even way beyond the ley line to the finish, so that when I finally tacked, I'd be in front of the other boats. And I passed a lot of boats using that little trick.
Steve, you want to make any comment on that?
I have passed Eric doing the same thing.
Steve is particularly good at pulling this off. He's really good at
And
rounding
Eric has
boats.
passed me on that one.
When I first figured out how to do this, it was Alan Wolf, actually, that I was passing most. I did it to him multiple times. Does anybody have any questions on this or any suggestions on what anybody should be doing differently? Okay, well, let's move on to
Eric?
Yes?
I will share that we got the notice we have unlimited minutes. I don't know if you saw that.
No, I didn't see that. Okay, so we're
Okay.
not limited on time tonight?
Well, I do have dinner later.
Okay, we are not limited by Zoom on the amount of time we have tonight.
We'll see. They didn't lie to us.
So the previous example was 3 boats coming into the mark on port tack. So the inside boat, while she was entitled to mark room, she was required to keep clear of the other boats. The outside boats had right of way. So in this situation, it was really the outside boats that got to control the actions of the boat with mark room. So what happens if instead of coming to the mark on port tack, you come to the mark on starboard tack? Any thoughts?
Doesn't make a difference, does it?
The rules are a little more complicated. Tacking in the zone, oh no, jibing in the zone has to come into play.
Okay, well, if you want to look rules, we will take a look at the rules. And rule 18.4 is jibing in the zone. And it says, when an inside overlapped right-of-way boat must jibe at a mark to sail her proper course, which occurs in this scenario here. Certainly coming to a leeward mark on starboard, you have to jibe to round it on port, but it would also apply at a wing mark or a jibe mark. So if you're sailing a triangle course, this rule applies at both of those marks. So when she must jibe at a mark to sail her proper course, until she jibes, she shall sail no farther from the mark than needed to sail that course. So if you are the starboard boat coming in to jibe at a leeward mark, you can't sail way off the course. You can't drive all the boats off the course. You can do that outside of the zone before Rule 18 applies, but once you're in the zone, you can't. Unless you're at a gate mark. Rule 18.4 does not apply at a gate mark. Yes, Jerry?
I'm sorry. I have a question on the last scenario. I'm on my iPad and I couldn't figure out what's going on. But when they round the mark and green goes inside, how come yellow and blue don't luff?
Okay, good point. Remember I said room freely given can be freely taken.
Right. Oh, I've got that. But now
But,
we're around the mark. We're going upwind, and by the action of green, blue is right away. Can't she immediately luff green?
Let me start over. I said room freely given may be freely taken, but it can be risky to go into that position. If nothing is preventing blue from turning up hard, then let's say at position 5, well, in between position 5 and 6, certainly at position, well, it's not quite clear exactly the way I've drawn this diagram. You do have a good point, Jerry, and I want to emphasize that green can't just stick her nose in and get away with it scot-free. If blue or yellow even, while they're still at the mark, can turn tight, then she's still entitled to mark room and she can turn tight. Room to sail the course. She doesn't have to give the other boats room to get inside of her.
And I'm saying, my question is beyond the mark, okay? Where, I guess would be position 7, really.
Okay.
So
Jerry, my one comment
yellow
was
is-
why blue doesn't actually luff 7. Blue doesn't luff green, is then yellow just sails away from both of them.
yeah, I get that. So why doesn't yellow luff them both? You know, you talk about driving somebody off the course. Yellow has become right away because of actions of other boats. That means she can luff up, I think.
Yes, and then you've got the fact that she's got dirty air from 7 at this point and not moving as fast. Those kinds of things are going on. So I just think as I watch the sailors rounding the mark like this, the yellow and the blue boats never think about luffing up the inside boats.
Okay, we're talking now about 2 different rules. Rule 17, proper course, is first of all, can yellow luff blue up and can blue luff green up? And in this instance, the answer would be yes, she can. Because yellow did not establish overlap from clear astern of blue. Blue and green came in to windward of yellow. So neither yellow nor blue are restricted from sailing above their proper course. So they could take blue, or yellow could take blue head to wind if she wants, and blue can take green head to wind if she wants.
Okay, that was my question. Thanks, Eric.
Provided that while she's changing course, now we're talking Rule 16, she gives them the opportunity to keep clear. So what happens if at position 7, or even between 6 and 7, blue tries to take green head to wind?
Green
Well,
better go head to wind.
green had better go head to win, but blue can't force green to hit the mark at this point.
Why not?
Let's go back to the rules. And we'll go back up to look at Rule 18.2D. Rules 18.2B and C cease to apply when the boat entitled to mark room has been given that mark room. Got that? So looking at this picture,
And remember, the definition of mark room is to the mark and at the mark, but not necessarily past the mark.
once the mark is no longer affecting a boat's ability to sail the course, she's past it. And the obligation to give mark room ends. So arguably at position 5, yellow's right to mark room ends.
Chip, I'm thinking there's some judges out there who might actually say at step 7, mark room is still owed. Do you have a thought on that?
Did you ask me?
I asked Chip, but Jerry,
Oh.
yeah, you as well.
Well, there's no, like Eric said, the mark room has been given, and I think blue could love green at that point, no sweat.
But you can't push them into the mark because
No, you can never, you can never cause somebody to push somebody to hit a mark.
That's right. I agree with Jerry.
I disagree that you can never force somebody into the mark. But that's probably, it's not related to this discussion.
buoy mark. Can't push them into a motorboat, but you, different rule discussion, there are times you can push them into a buoy mark.
You've whet my appetite.
Let's come back to this discussion here, but we'll go
Okay,
back
you shouldn't say that.
to,
Now I'm curious.
okay, let's look at this diagram and say, what if at position 5, let's say yellow had come inside, and rather than spinning out and going above the mark, that at position 5, yellow had tried to go in between blue and the mark. Blue is under no obligation to give yellow that room.
So in this case, Jerry, blue could run yellow into the mark.
Blue can run yellow into the mark if yellow tries to stick her nose in. In fact, even at position 4, if yellow sails straight from position 4, blue can still turn up at position 5 and drive yellow into the mark.
Now, to get even more esoteric, if the mark is a day marker, that would be an obstruction that would cause damage. So it would be best to let yellow pass than protest.
It would be better.
Wouldn't it be an obstruction, though, if it was a day marker?
Okay, you want to get into the definition of, well, it is, yes, it is an obstruction if it's a day mark. It meets the definition of an obstruction. But Rule 19, room to pass an obstruction, would not apply because it's also a mark. Let's go back to the rules. Jolene, you're going to have to help me backtracking on some of these questions because we're getting nested.
I think you're pretty well caught up. This is the last one. It was just your next scenario that you're going into, which was the 3 boats.
No, I'm already losing my train of thought here. So,
Okay.
Rule 19 applies between 2 boats at obstruction except when the obstruction is a mark, the boats are required to leave on the same side. So if Leeward Mark is a day mark, yes, it's an obstruction, but ruminative obstruction, Rule 19 doesn't apply. It's still just a Rule 18. The only time Rule 19 applies at a mark is if the mark is a continuing obstruction. So if the sailing instruction said sail around an island, then the island is the mark, but it's also a continuing obstruction. In that case, Rule 19 would apply, not 18.
So
Okay.
we're getting into some esoteric stuff. Let's go on with the basic tactical.
Okay.
Esoteric.
Okay. Jerry asked, why is she allowed to run her into the mark? And let's talk about that. Let's move on to Rule 21. This is an important rule, and I was going to cover it momentarily, but let's do it now. When a boat is sailing within the room or mark room to which she is entitled, she shall be exonerated if, in an incident with a boat required to give her that room or mark room, A, she breaks a rule of Section A, which is the right-of-way rules, starboard, port, windward, leeward, clear ahead, clear stern, and while tacking. So she breaks a rule of Section A, Rule 15, which is acquiring right-of-way, or Rule 16, which is changing course, or if she's compelled to break Rule 31. So if you are the boat entitled to mark room and another boat forces you to hit the mark, provided you round it, you're exonerated for hitting it. You still have to round it, but you're exonerated for hitting it. If you are the boat entitled to mark room and you are sailing within that mark room, you can change your course anytime you want, as fast as you want, without having to give the other boats room to keep clear. And you're exonerated if you do. So if the other boats don't keep clear, they're out of luck for going into an untenable position. Now note that 14 is not in this list. If you're entitled to mark room and you're sailing within that mark room, you still have to try to avoid contact. But you don't have to give the other boats room to keep clear, either if you're the right-of-way boat changing course or if you've just acquired right-of-way. Now that's a very important thing for the boats that owe a boat mark room. If you owe a boat mark room, you had better anticipate what course she's going to sail in order to take that mark room. Because if you get in the way, then you don't get the opportunity to keep clear.
If in an incident with a boat required.
What was that, Jerry?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I was muted.
Disagreeing with me without thinking I can hear, huh? So in this diagram, as blue is changing course from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, she doesn't have to give yellow room to keep clear. If yellow goes inside of her, yellow has to anticipate that blue is going to change course and stay out of the way. That's why it's so much a better option for yellow to slow down if she has to in order to go astern of blue and outside. She's going to wind up behind, but that's not nearly as bad as having to spin out and miss the mark or have to take penalty turns. Okay, now we're back to what if the inside boat is on starboard? What changes? So this is a very similar diagram to what I drew before, except that here, blue in the middle is the boat that's ahead at the zone. And the 3 boats are overlapped with each other. And they're all on starboard tack. So what's different about this scenario? So,
18 have 4.
beg your pardon?
They all have to tag, huh?
18.4.
They'll have to jibe at the mark.
Okay, so who's entitled to mark room from whom in this situation?
Blue is mark room.
I'm saying yellow is entitled to mark room.
Yeah, I would think yellow's entitled to mark room. They're the inside boat at the overlap, with an overlap when the first boat reaches the zone.
Yeah. There's a common misconception that the first boat that gets to the zone is the one entitled to mark room, and that's not true.
Oh,
You
okay.
have to look at the position of the boats, and the inside boat is entitled to mark room. So these three boats are overlapped. So because yellow is inside of blue, blue has to give yellow mark room. And because, so does green. And green also has to give blue mark room. So does yellow have to sail directly to the mark? Is there anything these boats can do to force her to sail directly to the mark? And the answer is no. Not only is yellow entitled to mark room, she also happens to be the right-of-way boat. And as the right-of-way boat, she can sail away from the mark. She can use her position as the leeward boat to force the other two boats to sail away from the mark, provided she gives them room to keep clear. Remember, the rule said that if you are sailing within the mark room to which you are entitled, you get exonerated for breaking Rule 16, which is changing course. Well, in this case, yellow is sailing outside of the mark room to which she's entitled. So as she changes course, she does have to give the other two boats room to keep clear. But as long as she does, she can force blue to head up, and blue will turn and force green to head up.
I don't think I ever see this happening.
Well, you may wish to. So you see yellow actually sails away from the mark, a couple of boat lengths away from the mark, before jibing. So this is because not only is she the inside boat, but because she's the inside right-of-way boat, inside overlapped right-of-way boat, she can force the other boats out of the way and do a tactical rounding.
Has anybody tried this maneuver?
Yes, it works well.
Thank you, Alan. And also, because she's the inside overlapped right-of-way boat, she may not sail farther from the mark than necessary to sail her proper course before jibing.
So Alan, do you get to try it very often or no?
As often as I can get into that starboard tack inside position, it's great.
Okay.
Now, also mind that your jibing point is different if you're in a monohull or a catamaran or another high performance boat that has a tighter driving angle, or I guess broader driving angle.
How do the other competitors react when you pull this maneuver on them?
Oh, they're screaming, when are you going to jibe? But I'm on starboard tack, so it's all good. I get to choose when I jibe and choose when I make my approach to the mark to have a tactical rounding if that's what I want to do.
So they seem to understand that what you're doing, you're entitled to do?
Yep. As long as I jibe at the appropriate moment, which is what Eric is about to talk about.
Right. So now they're all jibing and rounding the mark.
Option C.
So if your takeaway is, hey, when I come to a leeward mark, I should be on starboard and I should be on the inside, yes, that's a very powerful position to be in. But as Alan rightly points out, how good it is to be there is also related to the performance of your boat. How tightly can it turn? How fast are you going? How easy is it to jibe and get on course and take care of everything?
And douse your spinnaker.
Because if yellow doesn't pull off this rounding well, then either she's going to get stuffed or she's going to force the other boats outside and they're going to protest her because she took more than her mark room, entitled mark room. So yellow has to be good enough to pull this maneuver off. So yellow has to be careful there. But if she does, as you can see from this drawing, she came in, overlapped with the other two boats, and she exits, you know, 1 or 2 boat lengths ahead and to windward. So she's ahead, she's casting dirty air on the other boats, and she's free to attack if she wants to. So it's a great passing opportunity, provided you have the skills to execute it. And the way I drew this, I drew green coming up behind blue. In a lot of situations, if she was a little bit farther ahead, if she was like even with blue coming in, then she might wind up even farther outside. That's what we call a pinwheel. And the more boats there are on the pinwheel, the worse it is for the outside boats. So does everybody understand this? Does anybody think that any of these boats should have done something different or differently?
Oh, I always like the idea of green slowing down.
Remember I said before, slow down to go fast. So let's look at the situation again and play it out. And notice at position 2, perhaps you didn't see it while it was initially playing. I was looking for it and didn't see it. You see green here has pulled her sails in a little bit. Her jib is luffing, it's no longer drawing. She's pulled in her mainsail, and she's slowed down. And actually, coming up on position 3, she's fallen behind, in between position 2 and 3, she's actually fallen behind blue. So now that enables her to come inside right behind yellow. And yellow pulls off a tactical rounding, and green manages to pull it off too. So in this position, yellow and blue have come out about the same as they did in the previous one. But green, by slowing down, not getting caught in the pinwheel, slowing down and coming on the inside, has managed to pull ahead of blue. She's still a little over a boat length behind yellow, but previously she was 2 boat lengths behind, and she was in a really bad position. At least here now, she's free to tack away, and she's ahead of blue. So she's passed a boat and put herself in a better position. And Jerry, yes, if at between position 6 and 7, if blue had luffed up, she could have forced green into the mark. So this is an example of if you slow down and come on the inside, you can really gain, but it's risky. Normally, if I were the boat trying to do that, I would do that if there were 3 or 4 boats caught in the pinwheel. The more boats there are caught in the pinwheel, the better it is to slow down and come in behind. Because if there's a bunch of boats caught in the pinwheel, then they can't come up and cut you off at the mark. That clear? Any questions or observations or suggestions?
When must yellow jibe?
Let's go back to the rules. That's rule 18.4. I'm trying to be clever here, and I'm winding up just going back and forth. 18.4 jibing. When an inside overlap right-of-way boat must jibe in a mark, blah, 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 she shall sail no farther from the mark than needed to sail her proper course. And her proper course is, well, the definition of proper course is the course she would sail in the absence of other boats mentioned in the rule that uses the term. And since no other boats are mentioned in this rule, it's whatever course she thinks is going to get her around the course the fastest.
So Alan, when you pulled this maneuver on other boats, have you actually sailed a little further than your proper course, just for kind of insurance sake?
Usually I'm trying to get to my tactical rounding and close off the green boat that's going to be trying to cut inside of me because I'm, in case I blow the rounding. The downside is, and which kind of poses my question, is if yellow fouls their spinnaker and can't make the jibe and ends up sailing way past the mark, what recourse does blue have?
Protest. If yellow, well, let me step back. The rules do not excuse poor seamanship. So if yellow carries her spinnaker all the way into her jibe and tries to jibe with the spinnaker up or douse and jibe at the same time and makes a mistake and something gets fouled, if she doesn't turn up to still do the tactical rounding, if she sails farther away from the mark than her proper course, then she's broken rule 18.4, and the other boats can protest her for it.
Alan, was that what you expected?
Yes.
Eric, this is Dale. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'd like to make 2 points. This is not an uncommon situation for Charlie and me. One point is that if you've got a spinnaker up, you better be very careful when you plan to take it down, because you also have a pole. And so the spinnaker may fly in a direction you wouldn't want it to go and cause you some problems. And the other thing is that sometimes, particularly if you're in a situation in which there's very little air, sometimes sailing around the whole mess, being the outside boat, isn't a losing position when everybody else in there's trying to get around and trying not to bang into other boats.
Dale, I was wondering if that was the pinwheel at that point, or if it was some kind of mayhem taking place where there's just total chaos and it's just better to go outside far enough away so you got a little bit of air.
Well, sometimes it's better to, if you're behind a whole bunch of boats that are doing a pinwheel in very little air, we found occasionally that steer clear of everything and just slide to the outside. Now, you also, hopefully you have better air out there, but that's just a sort of an unusual circumstance. But if you're in a bunch of boats coming down for the pinwheel, everybody's hollering at everybody else for room. From the judge's standpoint, I guess most of you understand that there's some clanking and butting that goes on that's not reported. People just sort of shrug it off. And
we call it bumper boats.
That's right, exactly. And that that's not that uncommon. Every couple of regattas, usually doesn't occur in high wind. It usually occurs when, you know, you may have steerageway problems or stuff like that. But getting the spinnaker down is part of this planning that takes place as you're entering that circle. And, you know, so you've got a spinnaker on one side and a pole on the other, and the skipper wants to jibe the boat all of a sudden. You know, it's a cluster.
And I agree with you completely on both points, Dale. Dousing your spinnaker, if you're going to do this, you probably want to be dousing your spinnaker, you know, by the time you get to the zone. You probably want it down so that you're free to do those maneuvers. And whether or not you can pull off that turn also varies a lot with the characteristics of your boat. It's a lot harder to turn tight on a multi-hull, especially a single-handed one. So, you know, if I am the yellow boat here, you know, I really am at risk here because I've got a lot of stuff to do on the boat to execute the jibe. I've got to be turning the boat. I've got to be passing the tiller around. I've got 2 sails I've got to be managing, all the while watching other boats and the mark like a hawk. So it can be very challenging to pull that off, especially if I'm the leeward boat, if the ice tope's the leeward boat and the windward boats are monohulls. And in that type of situation, and also, as you say, if this is a very light wind rounding, a lot of times the boats just pile up at the mark and park. And if they're parked and you try to come inside, you're just going to get into a big raft of boats. And the people who see that happening and skirt wide and maintain their speed are just going to sail past everybody. So in light wind conditions and as a multi-hull sailor coming up to a mark, especially one with mixed classes, I find it's better just to sail around everything. And as a multi-hull sailor coming up, I rarely ever jibe in the zone. Just because, as I said before, there's a lot of stuff to do and it's easy to mess the jibe up. I prefer to jibe outside the zone and then come in on port. Steve, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I very seldom jibe inside the zone.
Or is your boat handling better
unless
than
I'm
mine?
the only boat around the mark. Huh?
I said, or is your boat handling better than mine?
I have jibed inside the zone before, but not normally when there's other boats. I've done it when I've had other boats coming up from the other side and jibed, like you've got it drawn here. I'd be the yellow boat coming in. I'd come into the circle and jibe, but I would be well ahead of the blue boat before it came in. I try to jibe so I'm dead ahead of him. So I have right to the thing and he has to go around me or whatever, and I can take the rounding that I wish to take.
Well, for the
Jolene?
So for the monohulls who sail with the catamarans, if you have a cat, that yellow cat coming in on, oh, he's on port, right?
If number
he's on
one
starboard.
is, if
He's on starboard.
yellow was a catamaran, he would probably be coming in at a 45-degree angle instead of almost dead downwind here. And if he's coming into a pack of monohulls, they owe him mark room, and they're obligated to keep clear of him, being windward boats or on opposite tacks. And this is a situation I've seen several times on the water where I'm coming screaming into the leeward mark into a bunch of flying Scots, and I yell starboard, and they look up with a look like deer in the headlights because they didn't realize I was there until I'm yelling starboard. And they simply, at that point, don't have anywhere to go. And that's a bad
Actually, what I
situation
don't
for
think the
everybody.
phrase- Eric, I don't think the phrase deer in the headlights is a good phrase, but what it is they don't realize that you actually are the right-of-way boat and that they should be keeping clear of you.
They don't realize it, because they haven't thought these scenarios through. And also because, if it's 3 or 4 Flying Scots all fighting each other for position at the mark, they're not looking off to the sides. They're looking at each other. And they may not realize that there's another boat with different performance characteristics coming in fast from the side. And the rules don't excuse that. They require boats to look and see and be prepared to give that room. So yes, I could come screaming in. Yes, I could come screaming in.
Eric, I have a question.
It's a bad idea.
In regard to if we had the same Flying Scots, for instance, is there anything the Blue boat could do to maintain their lead in this situation?
Well, Blue could try to slow down.
I mean, once there's overlap established, they're sort of hosed, aren't they?
Well, because Yellow's the right-of-way boat and she's overlapped at the zone, that's a really powerful position. And it's very difficult for Blue not to wind up behind here. So really what you want to be saying, the question you need to ask is not what can Blue do at this position, but if you were Blue and you saw this position developing, this scenario developing, what would you try to do? My real message here is you need, instead of looking at what happens when we got to the zone and what can we do now, is when you're coming downwind and approaching the zone, and when you're in the bottom third of the race course, look around at the boats around you, see what your positions are, and say, when we get to the zone, who's going to be in control? Who's going to have the best position? And can I wiggle myself into that spot?
Well, David, that would be where you're trying to keep Yellow from establishing that overlap by trying to get ahead of it.
Right.
As Blue, I'd be doing everything I could to get ahead of Yellow or to drive Yellow away or to turn so that when I got to the zone, I was clear ahead.
Or broke just before you got, yeah.
Okay, now this brings up a very, very important point. And we'll go back to the rules for this. And we happen to be right here. 18.2E, or 18.2E. If there is reasonable doubt that a boat obtained or broke an overlap in time, it shall be presumed that she did not. Now, to the best of my knowledge, this is the only place in the rules where they place a presumption of position, or how I like to think of it, a burden of proof. So if two boats are close, either almost overlapped or overlap almost broken when they get to the zone, if it's not clear that a boat got that overlap or broke that overlap in time, then she didn't. So coming back to this picture, let's say that Blue was trying to break an overlap and she just barely broke it by the time she got to the zone. No, she didn't break it.
We're not seeing the picture.
You're not seeing the, I'm showing screen sharing of the, what do you see, Joe?
We see it now.
Okay, it just took some time. The video lagged a little bit. If you're jockeying for position coming up to the zone, and you just get your overlap in time, well, no, you didn't get it in time.
If you think you just got it in time.
It is, these pictures show a very nice circle around the mark at the 3 boat length zone. So we can look at this and say, okay, here is exactly where they were positioned at the moment they reached the zone. There is no drawing in the water around a mark. It is remarkably difficult to judge exactly where the zone is while you're racing, especially if your boats are moving fast. So my suggestion is, if you are moving around and jockeying for position and trying to break or establish an overlap, do that well away from the zone. Do it 4, preferably 5 boat lengths away from the zone, so that it's clear that you've gotten overlap in time or broken overlap in time.
And if I am blue boat in this scenario, I will tend to say no overlap. Or if I'm in a generous mood, I'll say you got the overlap, and just get rid of any conversation right there and call it.
Right. As if I were if I were yellow or blue coming up to this area, 4 boat lengths from the mark, I'd be saying, if I was yellow, I'd be saying, I'm overlapped. I'm going to be needing room at the mark, even though we aren't at the zone yet. As I've said before, the rules don't require that hailing, but it's always good if the boats know what the other boats are planning to do. If they don't know, that's when collisions happen.
How do you know what size the zone is supposed to be? Is it based on the largest boat or the smallest boat?
Anybody know the answer to that?
I do.
I do. The longest boat. Yes, the longest boat.
Is he
Nope.
right?
The first boat in the zone.
The definition of zone says the zone is an area around the mark within a distance of 3 hull lengths of the boat nearer to it. So if the 2 boats are different sizes, the zone is determined by the boat that's closer to the mark.
So Alan, if you were in your Lightning and Ken was in his Wayfarer and he was ahead of you, it would be based on the Wayfarer boat length.
I like the Opti. If the Opti gets there first, it's a whole lot shorter zone than if the Lightning gets there first.
Right. Alan, were you at the last Zoom meeting? No, you weren't in the last Zoom meeting we did.
No, I missed that one. Yes.
Yes.
It's posted on YouTube.
The joke about this is an Opti and a TP52 are approaching a mark, and the Opti's ahead. Oh, the Opti's closer to the mark. How big is the zone? And the answer was the Opti's a little under 8 feet long, so the zone is a little under 24 feet, around 22, 23 feet, which is less than half the length of a TP52. So the TP52 is not in the zone until she gets within half a boat length of it.
And the more of what's happening with our racing is lasers and thistles or lasers. Yeah, thistles, lasers, and Scots.
But that particular example is one of the cases where the rules were never really written with that in mind. The rules sometimes break down when you have boats that are too dissimilar sailing against each other or sailing in the same area.
So Eric, let's do a time check. Was there anything else you wanted to cover?
I had one more scenario drawn. If I can get it to come up.
Pass it. You okay not doing it at this point?
Well, I already started to show it, which is this one, which was 2 multi-hulls coming in. And let me just play this out. So you had one of them coming in hot on the starboard lay line and jibing around the mark, with another one coming in on port and trying to go inside. And you see the blue boat is yelling for room, and the yellow boat is saying no room, and the blue boat has to turn and go outside. And this is based on an incident that happened to me at Lake Murray several years ago. And just to illustrate, yes, yellow has come out ahead by doing this maneuver, but she came out a little bit ahead. Whereas the blue boat, she was much farther ahead coming into the mark than she was exiting. So I'm illustrating here that, the inside overlapped right-of-way boat gets to do a tactical rounding, but also catamarans don't jibe very quickly.
If the yellow boat If the yellow boat jibes sooner to make a seaman-like rounding, would that be an advantage?
Well, if yellow had jibed earlier, then she would have come out from the mark wide. And then blue would have snuck in early, inside, coming out of the mark. So yellow would still have been ahead, but blue would have been to windward, which is what blue was trying to do. So it would not be an advantage to yellow to jibe sooner.
So diving at the leeward mark for a catamaran could be disadvantageous.
It can be risky, and especially because the boats are moving fast. If blue didn't swerve and go outside, but it kept going inside, then it could have turned into a nasty collision.
So to the individuals on the Zoom session, any questions based on what's been covered?
I was just going to say that's all I
That
had
last
prepared.
scenario. I got a question on that last scenario, Eric.
Okay.
Let's say wind is coming from the opposite direction. The wind is coming from the bottom up.
You mean if this is a windward mark?
Yeah.
Why would you be that high above the windward mark?
Okay, the topic of this discussion was tactics for rounding a leeward mark. I think
Okay.
it might be good to talk about how do the mark room rules apply at a windward mark, but that's outside the scope of our discussion today.
Okay.
If people have more situations they would like to discuss or a different topic, like let's talk about tactics at the windward mark, I'm happy to have another Zoom session on that should people want to. Let me know if you want it.
Or email Eric or message him if there are certain questions you want to cover on future sessions. So any other questions from anyone before we go on to other things for the rest of the evening?
I'm going to drive you guys nuts, but why is it that the yellow boat had a right to jibe inside the circle like that? That's
Because they were overlapped and he was leeward boat, starboard boat, so he had right of way. The blue boat was port.
Okay, at position 1 here, yellow has reached the
can't see it
zone.
anymore. Okay,
I put it back up. Can you see it now?
right. Yes. Yes, I can see
At
it.
position 1, yellow and blue are overlapped. Even before position 1, they were overlapped. You agree?
At position 1,
Yes. Remember, the definition of overlap is either boat clear astern of the other. And if not, then they're overlapped.
okay, okay,
With some exceptions, but this case does not meet those exceptions.
okay,
So they are overlapped at the zone. So blue has to give yellow mark room. And not only does blue owe yellow mark room, but yellow is on starboard tack and blue is on port tack. So coming in, blue has to keep clear of yellow. Now at position 4, they're both now on port tack, and yellow is clear ahead of blue, so blue also still has to keep clear.
Mhm.
And if she sails inside of yellow, she has to give yellow room to sail her proper course. Remember, that was part of Rule 18 as well.
Right.
So all of those things conspire to yellow is free to make a tactical rounding if she wants. The only restriction on yellow's movement is that she can't sail farther from the mark than is necessary to sail her proper course before jibing. And
okay,
if blue
Thank you.
did go inside of yellow, yellow would not be required to give blue room to keep clear, provided she's sailing towards the mark at that point.
So Steve, was the key point there, the fact that they were indeed overlapped at the zone?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
And when boats come at extreme angles like that, sometimes we don't remember about that overlap, correct?
Right.
Because they're so far ahead, figuratively speaking. All right, any other questions?
So what I want y'all to take away from this is that you really need a good understanding of what the obligations are on every boat coming up to a leeward mark. And before you get there, you need to think about the boats around you and where do you want to be in order to be able to pull off the kind of rounding you want to do to either pass boats or to put yourself in a good position after the mark rounding. And there are several cases where being slightly behind is actually an advantage because it gives you the opportunity to sneak inside. And also for boats that can sail dead downwind on starboard, you probably really want to come to the mark on starboard because you have right-of-way over port boats, especially if you're the inside boat.
Thank you, Eric.